on to some words of wisdom coming from a lady very familiar to sheep and goat people, Peregrine Wolff, not perhaps so familiar as her current affiliation as executive manager of the Wildlife Diseases Association, and she also chairs the board of the Wild Sheep Foundation. Perry, I'm not sure if you have a presentation, but if you do, feel free to share your screen now.
Okay, I do have a presentation. So let's see if I can get this correctly. Well, obviously you're not seeing my screen, or are you? Probably not.
Well, we can see the...
you see it now?
We can see the presenter mode. Jen, can you perhaps help sort that out?
Oh, I can get it to, see, hold on. How's this?
Slideshow, perfect.
Perfect, okay. All right, thank you all, and sorry we had a little bit of email mismatch. But anyway, I'm gonna try to get you all back on schedule here. I'm going to take, since I'm not working for the Nevada Department of Wildlife anymore, and I'm not 100% up on the projects that they're embarking in, and certainly there's other people that are speaking today that have a better insight into that. I thought I'd talk a little bit about health, and that's why I said, don't lose sight of health. Let's not lose sight of health in the through the forest of disease. So wildlife health is a key component of wildlife management and conservation. We all understand that, and it's a concept that can be applied to individuals, populations, or ecosystems. It looks at the ability to maintain resiliency, homeostasis, or sustainability, and it occurs in the face of multiple stressors from these animals' environments. And certainly, I think this year we've seen plenty, as in many years, seen plenty of examples of stressors to wildlife and wild mountain ungulates and wild sheep. But some of them, of course, are, the changing climate or the burning climate, that's occurring. Loss of habitat, encroachment, increased animals living at the urban wildlife interface, increase of encroachment of domestic species, whether they're disease transmitters or even particularly carnivores. And then also people that think that they know better and or they would like to implement policy that impacts our ability to manage these animals on the landscape and thus potentially prevent disease from occurring and maintain health. So some of the things that we know that we can do to maintain or increase resiliency or homeostasis are standardized, implement, continue ongoing health surveillance, decrease risk, certainly very key to bighorn sheep and thin-horn sheep, wild sheep, engage and educate stakeholders on the impacts to wildlife, monitor, comment, and change policies, and collaborate and communicate. And what I want to just do is use sort of two examples in the monitor, comment, and change policy that when we're actively thinking about disease, there's little things that can sneak up and bite us when we're not really paying attention. But thankfully, there are some people that are paying attention. And I just want to show how these two things can really be important and can be game changers as much as many of the other threats that occur to wild sheep health. So the first one I want to talk about is something that's continuing. It's been ongoing and actually for well over a year, and this pertains primarily to the US. So maybe not the most appropriate to bring up in this group, but Canadians have their own, version of the Food and Drug Administration and their own guidelines that occur. And this is the US Food and Drug Administration, better known as the FDA, draft guidance for industry. And what this is is a statement by the FDA talking about compounding animal drugs from bulk substances. So like getting a pound of powder and making it into vials of a drug. And these are proposed guidance that would limit what animals can legally have these types of drugs. And in the current guidance, it is limited only to food animals, which is what we usually work on, in the form of an antidote, so something to combat a poison, not talking about anything else. And when we look at wildlife, wild sheep in particular, most of the drugs that we use for immobilization in wild sheep, BAM, thiofentanil, all of those, some of the sedatives that we use are all compounded from bulk substances. And then also many of the species we treat, and certainly all of our wild sheep, are considered food animals. So potentially this has a huge impact on our ability to continue working on disease, managing wild sheep, major issue. The other thing that's being done and looked at as part of this guidance is maintaining these drugs as office stock. And what that means is if you have it for office stock, that means that you have it on the shelf in a vial, and it can be used for any patient or at least any species. When we order some of our immobilization drugs from Wildlife Pharmaceuticals, they would say in the prescription, well, we're going to use it on bighorn sheep, or we're going to use it on mountain lions, but it's a drug that we would use on a number of different species. But that would be something that we would use as office stock. If it was banned and you were not able to maintain office stock, that would mean that when you had 50 wild sheep in downtown and needed to sedate some and move them out, that you really have to wait and order that from the drug manufacturer, from the compounding pharmacy. And that might take a day or it might take a week. So this ability to have these drugs as office stock is very important and very key to us being able to continue the work that we do. One of the things that there's been many of the wildlife health and management agencies that have jumped on this because it's recognized, and what we're trying to get through is to inform the FDA that this impacts not only just wildlife health, but for wildlife management agencies, it's a huge human safety issue. It's an animal safety issue. It's an animal health issue, an animal welfare issue, and impacts resource management. So what's being done about this not at this time, it's still in the comment period has just closed, but there's been collaboration between American Association of Wildlife Veterinarians, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, Wild Sheep Foundation, AVMA, and the Wildlife Committee of the United States Animal Health Association. And we're trying to bring attention to the immense negative impacts this would have on our ability to safely, humanely manage wildlife, and also the potential human safety impacts. And we are asking for the FDA to please add the use of medications compounded from bulk drug substances by licensed compounding pharmacies, such as some of the larger commercial compounding pharmacies or wildlife pharmaceuticals, Zopharm, for free-ranging and rehabilitated wildlife to the situations or conditions under which the FDA would not pursue enforcement action against the compounding pharmacy or the veterinarian. So that is the request, and if that's denied, one, those drugs could be taken away from us, or two, if they had to be made not from bulk substances, but you had to take a vial of 5 milligram per mil midazolam and boil it down to make 50 milligram per mil midazolam, the costs would be prohibitive, and probably it would be out of the reach of many wildlife management agencies and researchers to be able to utilize these types of things. So this is a pretty key piece of legislation that has a huge impact on wildlife health and thus trickles down into potentially impacting wildlife disease management. The other one that kind of popped up is from the animal care, USDA animal care. And it's a policy on research involving, a proposed policy on research involving free-living wildlife species in their natural habitat. So basically it's saying that they want to put out a policy to assist a research institution in determining whether an activity involving free-living wild animals in their natural habitat meets the regulatory definition of a field study and thus would not be covered under the Animal Welfare Act. And the Animal Welfare Act is an act that oversees any research animals and zoos and laboratories, and certainly everyone in the institutional researches, like in universities, is familiar with this type of thing. So what they're talking about is a field study is defined by the Animal Welfare Act as a study conducted on free-living wild animals in their natural habitat. However, this term excludes any study that involves an invasive procedure, harms, or materially alters the behavior of an animal under study. If it did any of those latter, it would be something that would need to be regulated under the Animal Welfare Act. And for everyone here that works in a research facility or a university, you know that there are hoops that need to be jumped through when planning any type of research program for wildlife, if you're going to be able to publish that information. So there's been a number of comments that have been made, again, from American Association of Wildlife Veterinarians and some other many other individuals commenting on this. And some of the key points that they brought forward is that this policy was developed, but there was never any collaboration or engagement with state and federal experts in the wildlife community. It was kind of done in-house. There's a lot of definitions, and many of them are not clearly defined. And that we felt this was a bit, going right to a policy was a little strict, and maybe this should be a guidance document and not a policy. And really, it is an Animal Care and Use Committee's role and responsibility for its institution to determine if a study meets the criteria of a field study as designed by the Animal Welfare Act. So this should be decided under a guidance document at the institution level and not at the federal level. And each research proposal needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis to address the species, seasonality, reproductive status, and other specific circumstances in the study proposal, which are not at all addressed in this policy document, and do have a pretty major impact on whether you would continue with some sort of research proposal. Okay, so why did I bring these up? Well, I want to bring these up because I just want everybody to remember that the world is watching. There is stuff happening. We are not living in a bubble doing our own management and research on free-ranging species, and that we have to recognize that it's up to us to kind of be the leaders in making sure that our actions are ahead of where we think the government could be going, or whether other folks could be going, not even the government, it might be NGOs. So for instance, with the Food and Drug Administration, one of the things that we can do to say, hey, We are different. We're ahead of the curve. Is, you know, every time an animal receives a drug, it gets a do not consume or call before consuming tag. Animals aren't immobilized during regulated hunting periods. Those sorts of things should be sort of second nature and standardized in all of our work, especially with wild sheep that have a lot done to them, have disease issues, and are also a premier hunted species. For the animal care policy on research involving free-living wildlife species in their natural habitat, we should all, I know there's a number of individuals on this call that are working in agencies that do have some sort of animal care and use committee or oversight of research projects. It doesn't have to be as formal as an IACUC, but it should be something that's there so that if anyone ever asks, you can say, yeah, every project that we do in-house, we review it, we look at all the different angles. It's not just the person that wants to do it that's making the decision. All the people involved are looking at it, and we come up with, formulate the questions, answer the questions, and come up with the best policy and take into account and address all of the questions and concerns that people may have. That way, we're beyond reproach and have a much stronger position when certainly administrative rules or proposed guidance come up. We can say, hey, we've been doing this. You don't need to regulate us. We're already regulating ourselves. So how does this play out kind of in real life with maintaining or increasing our resiliency and homeostasis? Well, I think standardizing, implementing, or continuing ongoing health surveillance. I want to point out that we already do have some tools out there in the toolbox, and we have to remember that they're there and to go ahead and use them. We do have the WAFO Wildlife Health Committee, and yes, I'm embarrassed to say they've not been updated officially since 2014, and that's on me. So now I've been shamed into doing this. The Wildlife Health Committee, which did, as Mark had mentioned, we did sit down and go through and standardize not only what we felt were appropriate herd health monitoring recommendations, but also the appropriate tests to use, how they should be implemented, who's going to use them. So that all of that information is available to everybody that wants it. And again, it shows that we're ahead of the game and that everything we do with wildlife, with wild sheep, we're thinking ahead and doing it correctly. So we do age classification, never let an animal be handled without getting as much information as possible. And this is not, what we're trying to take is not as important as to do so in a standardized and consistent manner, which again emphasizes that we are making the most of every time that we handle an animal. And I certainly don't want to forget to remind everybody to check for one of my favorite diseases is sinus tumor. So I had to put in that gross slide to wake everyone up. And also, and people have mentioned that this morning, is to maximize the use of passively collected samples. There's no IACUC that's needed to handle a dead animal. No one's going to fault you for collecting samples from a hunter harvested animals. These are a great source of information. The people that are hunting are engaged and involved and want to help with the situation. And I think that we should remember that, yes, we should be using these little gold mines whenever we have the opportunity. Another ongoing project that would, that speaks to the whole handling animals for field studies is the development now and review and refinement of the capture guidelines and protocols that were originally authored by FAWS out of Oregon many years ago with help from Helen. So once these are done, then we'll have a standardized guidelines and protocols, and that will guide us through every step of the way of working with these animals. Again, getting ahead of questions like, well, maybe we need to regulate you while you're doing management actions on your wildlife. I think that what comes up all the time and we need to remember is that, you know, we will be going through the gray wave. There's new people coming up. If you don't do it all the time, you tend to forget what you need to do next. So make sure to continue to train, make sure to continue to have protocols, and they're out there. And I think that they've been, these protocols are in the guidance documents and sampling guidance documents, so they're there. Continue to train in person, teach the next generation, teach your new folks that are coming in, and reteach the folks that have been doing this, because every year there's a new way to sample, there's a new broth to put it in, there's a new some piece of tissue that needs to be archived. Pretty soon we'll just be able to wave a wand over the animal and you know, get our answer. So in summary, I just want to emphasize that we really do get so focused on, I think, disease in bighorn sheep, and for good reason. But we do have to remember that there are many components to wildlife health in wild sheep, and that the more we engage and educate our stakeholders, the more we collaborate and communicate, we are also subjecting ourselves a little bit to risk, because we're putting ourselves out there. We have great movies that show what we're doing. We're doing a lot of outreach, but that also puts us out. We're not operating in a little bubble anymore. So my message is, you know, remember, there is policy and comments and changes that are coming out there. People are engaged and they have opinions. And if we want to continue to do what's best for wild sheep, I think we need to remember that we're working for overall health and not just focused like a laser on disease. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Perry, and thanks for keeping us grounded in both the real world and some of these bigger umbrellas that impinge on everything we do, and need to be, and you know, we ignore them at our peril, as you suggested. Well, I'm going to take a quick moment here. It's becoming apparent time is slipping past, and I might encourage some of the presenters to look at the Q&A and perhaps provide written answers to some of those questions that are there. The first three, for example, I think were directed to Tom, and maybe we can facilitate the communication that way, just in case we don't have much time left for discussion. In the meantime, Francis, if you could move ahead and share